Alright, in this video I'm going to show you how to fix a leaking water pump on a 2000 Ford Focus. Now I'm not a mechanic and I do not guarantee anything here. There's no warranty expressed or implied, and it may help if there's other videos online on how to change water pumps to give you some more confidence in what you're about to do, but this is my contribution and I hope it's helpful.
Today I'm going to be changing the water pump, the timing belt, and the tensioner. It's actually the water pump that went bad on a 2000 Ford Focus. So when you change the water pump, you might as well change everything else. And so I bought this kit here on eBay. I'll show you what it includes. So here's the timing belt. Here's the tensioner and the bolt that goes to the tensioner. Here's the actual water pump itself. Now sometimes there's a weep hole on the right in there, and that when the pump goes bad, that starts dripping. So you'll notice that coolant is coming out every time you start the car and stop the car typically, but it's actually leaking a lot of the times while it's running too. So I'm going to keep an eye on that if your levels go bad. My Focus water pump started going bad about 6 months ago, and I finally had the time to fix it on the day that it decides to dump snow and be freezing. So always seems to be the case. And then here's the gasket. Sometimes it's just the gasket that failed, but it's worth, if you're going to replace the gasket, you might as well replace the whole timing belt, tensioner, and all of that at the same time, because eventually the other parts will go bad. Now here's some warranties. I'll put the link. I researched, I got the best deal on this that I could find on the internet. It was a whole kit. It was about $70. Bought it on eBay, and I mean, it comes with a warranty and all that kind of stuff, but I think it was $70. Maybe $79 with free shipping. That was the total. Which, if you go to your local store, you're going to be spending about $150. The first thing you're going to do is you have to take off the passenger side front tire. So you're going to have to raise it up on jacks. Okay, so I have the car up on jacks on both sides, and I took the tire off on this side. I'll show you the next step in a minute. But what I want to show you here, you're going to be taking off the cooling tank, and then you're going to be taking off the motor mount on this side, and these can go bad as well. Quite often on a Ford Focus, you'll know if you have a bad motor mount if when you start your car it seems really noisy and there's a lot of vibration. It's like a rumble kind of sound, and your steering wheel seems to shake quite a bit. It could very well be you have a bad motor mount. I'll show you how to look at that as well. But you're going to have to take that off, and if you take that off, the whole motor is going to drop down, and that can really mess things up. If you have a bad motor mount, that can also kind of shake things around and bend and break parts. Okay, now ideally I would have a jack that would go up high enough. I don't. This, I could have just used two 2x4s, but I want to give you an idea. Basically, you want to support the oil pan, and the best way to support it, instead of just using the metal to metal, you're only getting the surface area of the jack against the oil pan. And if you do that, you're going to very likely indent or damage the oil pan. But if you distribute the surface area like I've done here with the whole 2x4 that spans the whole length of the oil pan, you're distributing the weight upon that whole surface instead of just upon that small little metal piece. So you want to support the whole motor, and this is how you do it.
When you unscrew the screw at the bottom of the radiator, you want to make sure that you have the cap on the radiator reserve tank. Otherwise, when you undo the screw, it'll come gushing out.
Okay, so underneath your car, okay, that screw right there, it's on the driver's side, right by the radiator, that is where you drain the radiator. So you undo that and it should just come pouring out. You can see I don't have much in here. Okay, so back on the top here, we need to take off this bolt. I'm using a 10 millimeter, and it's actually not, I don't have a 9.5, and I tried my Imperial, and I don't have any of the right sizes for that either. So the 10 fits, it's working, but it is kind of a loose fit. So anyway, you take off this bolt, and then the other side, it just kind of is a friction fit. So take this off, and I'll show you the next step. Okay, now according to my calipers here, this bolt that I just took off is 10 millimeters. Looks like it's just shy of 10 millimeters, or 3/8 of an inch. So maybe the edges were rounded on the bolt, or it's just too much gunk to fit the 3/8, because that's what I tried first. And then I went with the 10 millimeter. So if you have a metric set, use a 10. If you have a Imperial, use a 3/8, and it should fit. Okay, on the opposite side of the tank, there's that little thing, so you may need a screwdriver to just push the tab to slide it, and then it should just slide right off. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put the screwdriver in between. There's a little metal flange that kind of sticks out, so you got to just lift the plastic piece up and around it. So I need two hands to do this, so I'm just showing you how to get started. Okay, so once you have it lifted up over that little ledge, just wiggle it loose. And there we go, just comes right off. Alright, I'm going to put that to the side there. Now here's the motor mount. And this cap comes off of the motor mount. Okay, so this is the motor mount, and it's filled with the jelly. Now if you've never replaced this, and you've got a 2000 Ford Focus, but I imagine on others they're also failing, this will be kind of depressed, and you'll be able to, there should be some play in here. This one actually feels like it might be leaking also. But once this goes bad, your whole car is going to shake, and you replace this and you'll have a very noticeable difference. Anyway, to remove the motor mount, you need to undo these bolts here, and we're going to take off this plate here. Protects the timing belt. So we're going to have to take off all of this, and then remove the whole cover over the tensioner pulley and the whole rest of the water pump. Okay, so for the two bolts right here that connect the motor mount, I'm using an 18 millimeter. And I tried the Imperial again, and none of them fit properly. This was as snug as I could get. So I'm just going to use 18 millimeter on those. And then on this one, those are a smaller size. We'll get to those next. Okay, now I just want to show you the tool I'm using. This is a wrench here, and it has a telescoping handle. It also pivots because this is somewhat of an awkward angle. You can also get an extension here to make it a bit easier, but if you don't have an extension, or if it's still awkward, that's what makes the pivoting nice, and it just locks in and out, so you can adjust it to whatever angle you want. So this is, I don't know, I think I paid $15 for this wrench, maybe a little more. But then you just undo these bolts here, and we'll go on the next step. So next you want to take off these bolts here. This one here, there's 3 of them, and that holds the whole mount on. This actually feels loose underneath, so I'm going to have to tighten that up. It's a good thing I did this. The bracket that holds the motor mount is a 15 millimeter socket or wrench, and I've got my extension on, and this is where the pivoting shaft, or whatever you want to call it, really comes in handy, because otherwise you're going to be hitting this or other parts of your car. So this just makes it faster and easier. So 15 millimeter, and take out all 3 bolts. You want to get an extension to be able to get down there, and then, like I said, this pivoting head really comes in handy. So, and the other thing is, if you putting the jack underneath the oil pan with the wood plank is essential, because once you undo these bolts, that's what's holding this whole motor up. So you want to make sure you do that before you undo these bolts. So we're going to go ahead and take out the motor mount, and then we're going to take off the cover of the timing belt and get to work on that. Okay, so to take off the metal plate, I'm using a 1/2 inch socket to take those off. Now once you take those 2 bolts off, there's another 2 bolts right here, one right there, and then one on this side. Okay, so here we have all the bolts taken out. So this plate, I'm going to need both hands to take off, but that will expose the timing belt and that whole area. Okay, so next you want to take off this whole wheel well plastic cover. Okay, now sometimes the only way, or the easiest way, to take out those screws is from behind. So if you look on this side here, you can see it just protruding, and you just push it and it'll pop out, and you'll be able to take it out on the other side. Sometimes you just push totally out. So there you go. Okay, so under the car we need to remove this plastic cover that covers the water pump and all those parts. So we need a 10 millimeter socket for here, and then over there as well, right there, and I believe it's just those 2. Okay, so under the wheel well there's this plastic cover. Up here, this is the top of the wheel well cover, there's just kind of this friction fit part. You may have to put some negative pressure to get the screws out on these parts. And then right here against the fender we have, let's see, this is a T30. Fits right in there. You want to use the wrench to take that off. Okay, so there you have an 8 millimeter bolt. There's one on the other side as well, and you want to take those off. Okay, next you want to take off the bolts here that mount the power steering pump to the cover. This big metal cover here covers the timing belt. That way you can get to the bolts to take off the plastic cover down there that covers the water pump and the rest. And for these bolts for the power steering pump, I'm going to be using the 10 millimeter wrench. Okay, so here's 1, 2 bolts, and then there's a third one right down there that you want to take out, and that'll take the pump off of the metal cover. Okay, so once you remove this cover, it exposes, this is the timing belt here, and there's a little dot there that needs to be lined up with the hole right behind it. Oh no, I'm sorry. This little arrow, you'll be able to see it in a minute. I'll show you. That little area right there that's kind of poking up, that needs to be lined up with that hole right there once you put it back on, and then there's another one down there that you need to line up, and that's your timing. But now you need to remove this plastic cover. We've already removed 2 of the bolts, or loosened them. Then there's a third that the serpentine belt had to come off to be able to get to, which is fine. I was planning on replacing this pulley right here as well. It kind of makes a whining sound. I don't want that, so I'm going to replace this one. And it should improve the sound. Now the serpentine belt is actually in decent condition, but I'm going to replace that too. It's just worth it when you're doing jobs like this to just replace all of the parts that can break, because they will eventually. Okay, so here you have both covers off. This is the metal cover. I didn't totally take it off from the power steering pump, but just enough to move it. Then you have the timing belt here, the tensioner pulley here, and then the water pump gear there. And so we're going to be taking off both this here and the water pump, and then you want to make sure that you line up your timing arrows on the, well, we'll get to that point. So we're just going to take these 2 off. We're going to start with the tensioner pulley, and the bolt size on that is a 10 millimeter right there. Okay, so on the tensioner pulley, let me get the light on here. Alright, on the tensioner pulley, if you use a T torque wrench, let's see, this is a T50 torque wrench, just goes right in there. Now this is good if you're going to change the timing belt, or once you have the new tensioner pulley in, you're going to put the new timing belt on, and then you just pull it over this way. It relieves the tension on the timing belt so you can get the whole thing off. So there you have it. It's just torqued over this way, and then it pivots the pulley so that it comes off. Okay, when you're doing this, I've got a 3/4 inch socket, and this is where if you had an air tool it would be very helpful. Those are the kind of the professional ones that make that sound that you hear kind of NASCAR when they do a pit stop. So anyway, if you don't have that, you kind of have to imitate it, because this is a spinning wheel. So you put it on and you just kind of shake it and jar it. It'll keep spinning, but if you do it well enough, it'll eventually come off, and then you can just unbolt it. And then when you're putting it back together, if you just want to be able to, tighten it well enough. Let me take this off. But there's this hole here. If you put in like a spike or thin screwdriver and line this up with that, then you can tighten it well enough so that you can tighten the bolt. Anyway, that's just a little tip there. So now this wheel has to come off, and again, I need both hands to do that. So anyway, that's how you take that off. Okay, so here we have the bolts to the water pump. We're going to take those off, but you also want to undo the hoses that come out of the water pump right there. We'll undo the hoses first, and then take off the water pump. Okay, so to remove the water pump, you need a 1/2 inch socket, and there's 4 bolts on it, 2 on the left and 2 on the right. Okay, so here you have the water pumps. Obviously you can tell which is the new one, but I just wanted to show you here. You can see this is where the water and the coolant flowed out. So you can see that it was the weep hole. So it was a failing water pump. Sometimes, basically you look where the grime is collecting. It would be obvious if it was a hose or something, but this is obvious here that it is a failing water pump. So we're going to go ahead and put the new one in and get it going. Okay, so around here you can see some of the gasket stayed on, so I'm going to get a razor blade and just clean off all of the edges, making sure not to get any grime inside that area, and then we'll put on the new gasket and put on the new pump. So the next step is to put the gasket on, but I put some sealant. This is a silicone gasket maker. You can't use this on everything, but you can use it here. And I just put a very thin bead around both surfaces, very, very thin. That just helps seal it. Okay, so here's the gasket with the sealant on it. Now this may be somewhat redundant, but I'd rather do this once instead of have a leak or tear the gasket or damage it. So anyway, I put that on both sides, and now I'm ready to install it. Okay, so I have the water pump installed. I put on the tensioner pulley, and now I'm going to put on the new timing belt. Okay, so the thing that you want to make sure that you do is line up this little pointed arrow on the wheel to the dot on the block. That has to be lined up in order for this to be... Now this is one of the most important steps that you can do, is to line that up. If you don't, you can really mess up your engine. That's the worst case scenario, but a very likely scenario. Now there's this wheel and the wheel just below the timing belt. There's also that little dip mark in that metal plate right there, and there's a mark on that wheel. So you need to line those up and line this up, and that's how you replace the timing belt. If you don't do that, just obviously do it before you put the timing belt on. Otherwise, you're going to have some big problems. Okay, so as you can see here, that little raised nub is aligned with that notch, and that's what you want. So this part aligned there, and then the top wheel, you want those, the triangle and the dot aligned, and that way you know your timing belt's set up properly when you put it on, which is the next step. Now, if you had a lot of grime in here, you want to clean it out. You don't want that messing up your timing belt, shortening the life of it. So it's worth just getting something to clean that out before you put everything else on. Okay, so the timing belt is on. You want to make sure that you use the tensioner tool, using the hex wrench to turn it back so that you can take or put it on, and it does take a little bit of effort. You want to make sure you have it aligned in the middle here and on all the parts properly. It should be fairly straightforward, but basically when it comes up to the water pump, then it wraps around that way and then onto that pulley wheel there. Now the rest is pretty straightforward. Just put it all back together and take your time, and it should all work fine for you. Now obviously you want to make sure you put more coolant back in your car. Okay, so one of the last steps, and I didn't show it in the video on taking it off, is the serpentine belt, and you can use a 1/2-inch wrench just right down there. 1/2-inch wrench, and you leverage it that way, and then you can take the belt off. But to put it back on, you may need a serpentine belt tool. You can get this from your auto store, local auto shop. It's free at AutoZone to rent with a deposit. So that's what I got, and It's like a $30 deposit. And then when you put your coolant back in, make sure you put in the plug, screw that in at the bottom, but it's a 3/4 of a gallon ratio of coolant to water in most areas, unless you live in like Alaska or wherever that it's super freezing. Then it's just a straight coolant. So anyway, that's those are the steps, and you just put it back together and hope it works.
Thanks for watching. I hope this was a helpful video for you. Please rate and comment. It helps me a lot, even if you just rate. And just so you know, I've been driving the car for about 3 months now, since I made this video or filmed it, and everything still works fine. Thanks for watching.